Welcome to a Practice Pro CPD, brought to you by LAWPRO.
I'm Joan Ratake-Lang, the Executive Director of the Toronto Lawyers Association, and I'd like to welcome you to Working Together. I'm really proud and excited to say that this is another partnership program with LAWPRO. We have developed an excellent working relationship with them. The programming that we're able to host and take registrations for, that LAWPRO does the really heavy lifting of pulling together excellent speakers is it's wonderful, and I have to thank them. Judah is the lead on that, and he will be your moderator this morning. And today, I think we've stepped it up even a little bit more. We've gone international. One of our speakers is joining us from Oregon. So not only are we Canadian, but now we've gone North American. So it's kind of exciting, I think. So everyone, your audio and video is muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom. Judah will be acting as our moderator, so he'll be monitoring that. We do find with these programs, sometimes we have some interesting discussion in the chat. That's fine. Just please don't put your questions in there because it's a little much to monitor both places. So I'm going to now turn off my audio and video and turn it over to our great panel. I'm looking forward to this, and I'm sure you all are too. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Joan. LAWPRO is delighted to continue to partner with Toronto Lawyers Association. And I'm Judah Stravchinsky. I'm the director of Practice Pro, LAWPRO's Claims Prevention and Risk Management Program. And as both LAWPRO and TLA do, I'm going to begin today's event with a land acknowledgement. So just so everyone knows, I'm speaking to you from Toronto. This is also where TLA obviously is located. It's where LAWPRO has its main offices. And I respectfully acknowledge that Toronto is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It's now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the Credit. As a personal note, as I've been preparing to deliver today's land acknowledgement and with all of the recent events that are requiring us to think through more around truth and reconciliation, I've started reading this book. It's called Indigenous Toronto. I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in the past, present, and future of Toronto and the Indigenous peoples who share the land with us. That said, as this meeting is virtual, we're not all gathered on the same space. And for many, this land acknowledgement is not for the territory, the traditional territory you're on. So if that's true for you, we invite you to take some time and learn about the territory and treaty lands you're on. As a starting resource, we encourage you to visit the website www.native-lands.ca. That's native lands with a dash.ca to search a location to find the appropriate territory and the appropriate territorial acknowledgement, which you can find under the resources tab there. You can also reach out to local friendship centers for further guidance. So I'd like to recognize the long history of all First Nations in Ontario and the Métis and Inuit peoples. We thank First Nations people who lived here and continue to live in these lands for sharing them with us in peace. So thanks to Joan for our introduction. Thank you to Toronto Lawyers Association. And thank you for joining us for this event, working together remotely, managing and leading through COVID and beyond. We all know that the COVID pandemic forced the legal sector to leap forward decades in a matter of days. We've all stretched. We're accomplishing more than we ever imagined possible to keep serving our clients, but we're also feeling stretched. The pandemic's taken its toll. It continues to take its toll on our mental health, which is something that we have talked about a couple of times now at events with the Toronto Lawyers Association. Our most recent session was last week. It's now available for replay on practicepro.ca. I have no doubt that mental health will continue to be one of the themes that we mentioned today. But there is no turning back, and we're going to need to stretch again to figure out how we work in what I'm starting to call the next normal. And so how we work forward for the future is going to be our next biggest challenge. And it's also our next opportunity to find meaningful ways to practice law and to effectively serve our clients. So today, we're going to look at the future of work for lawyers and for law firms. Today's event, we're going to focus on four main themes. First, we're going to look at what's happening on the ground now. We're going to look at the different ways that people have figured out how to work and serve clients given the current environment. Next, we're going to talk in really practical terms about what this means for managing people remotely, for managing teams remotely. Next, we'll look again in very practical terms so that everyone's got some takeaways about how we can maintain or possibly shift our values and our workplace cultures, both right now and for the next normal. And finally, we're going to look at some practice processes and technology to help empower your practice. We've put together some written resources for today's program. For those of you who received them early, our apologies. This is entirely my fault, but one resource was missing. It's going to be sent out later today. It comes from one of our speakers, Karen Skinner at Gimbal Canada. But if you download the resources now at the link that's provided in the chat or at PracticePro/CPD, clicking on today's event and then clicking on the click here for supporting material link, you can download the complete set, including the resource that was missed in the early send-off. So today we've got what I think are some really incredible speakers. They're also incredible people. I am honored to be able to share some time with them today. Hong Dao is a practice management attorney from the Oregon State Bar. She is a sought-after speaker. She writes frequently on practice management and legal ethics, and thrilled that she can take some of the lessons that she's been learning over the last couple of years, in particular, advising lawyers and law firms for our audience. Kirsty Mathers-McHenry is a leader in Ontario's justice sector. She's worked with Legal Aid Ontario and many other Ontario legal organizations. She tirelessly promotes access to justice and equality rights. And most recently, she built the law firm Mathers-McHenry & Co. And she'll share her experience today with us about building out that firm and growing a law firm through the pandemic and beyond, and some lessons learned from that experience. And Karen Dunn Skinner joins us from Montreal. She helps lawyers and firms. She's a lawyer herself who combines that training with her Lean Sigma 6 training or Lean Six Sigma training. And frankly, a get things done attitude. It's been a pleasure working with her in the past. I'm delighted she's with us. She's co-founded Gimbal Canada and not only provides training for lawyers, but a real community of practice as well. So there's more on each speaker in the program resources. But let's start with that first theme around how different people are working today remotely. We've seen lots of different models out there that some people were doing before the pandemic, but some people had to shift through the pandemic. So Karen, why don't I ask you to start? What are you seeing on the ground with law firms and lawyers today?
Sure. So thank you very much for the introduction. I also am delighted to be here with this great panel. Listen, you know, if somebody had said to us a year ago how that we could see the amount of change in the legal profession that we have seen, that we saw in the course of essentially a single day or 2 or 3 days, we would have absolutely laughed. We've been working for 10 years trying to get lawyers to change and think differently about the way they practice, and some do and some don't. But seeing the shift that people were able to make was phenomenal, and I think does bode really, really well for how we can change the way our profession functions and delivers client services going forward. When I think about what I'm seeing now, we are still in Quebec seeing a lot of lawyers on the ground working from home. There is some movement in the larger firms to shift back to the office, but not for everybody. What we see, and we talk to lawyers now across Canada and across the US, we are seeing just about everybody focusing on how they can build hybrid models. So we're seeing some people moving back. Sometimes they're structuring it so that they have a certain proportion of the workforce that rotates through so that they still do maintain some social distancing. As things are starting to ease up, more people are going in and out of the office. But, you know, our clients are reporting different feelings about that, which I think is something that we need to talk about and people need to really consider. We have some clients who said, yeah, I was really excited to get back to the office, but then, you know, I got on the metro and it was a little bit more crowded than I was anticipating, and I'm not used to that. And then there was, you know, other people talking about parking issues. So I think we're going to see, I mean, right now we're seeing this hybrid, really a true hybrid of some people at home, some people at work. And in some jurisdictions, more people in the office than others. But I feel like we're going to see a boomerang where people are excited to get back to the office. They try, they go back, they see their colleagues again, but the inconveniences that we've all forgotten about suddenly raise their heads again. So I almost think we're going to see a boomerang, but right now we're definitely seeing a hybrid where people tend to be rotating through the office.
And Quebec's a little ahead of Ontario on the curve right now. So and you've been working with firms in the States who are also at times ahead of the curve. In Ontario, many are shut down still and working fully remote. So this is great to be able to see ahead a little bit. And so Hong, let's ask you, because you're out west and you're always ahead of us. It's frankly 3 hours ahead of us for you. So thank you for coming in early to join us. But what have you been seeing as well from your perspective?
Yeah, so I work a lot with small firm and solo attorneys, and I think for the smaller firms, they are going back on a voluntary basis. So no one is forcing anybody to go return to the office, but some of them do like to go to the office because of the setup, and that separation of work and life makes it easier for them to just do their work at home at the office and then go back home. And then for the solos, I think a lot of them, like a lot of them were just working, in the home, but now they really have felt more comfortable working at home in the remote environment. And for the big firms, I also have seen it's also voluntary. A lot of, I think essential staff are returning back to the office to do like the mailing, to get like essential, functions done. But in terms of attorneys and other staff, like they are returning on a voluntary basis. Even our organization, we are returning back voluntary based on a schedule like Monday, Wednesday. And I think the more people, the more vaccinated, the more people who, the more we see the vaccination rate increase. Right now, we're at almost 70%. So I think that will help make the transition to in office a little bit easier in terms of getting more people in the office, as opposed to only having a limit of like 10 people in a 50 people office, or one. So that will ease out, I think, during the summertime as more people get vaccinated. But yeah, it's a mixture, it's a hybrid, and they're trying to, I think the challenge that I've seen lawyers deal with is trying to have a hybrid policy in place that is sustainable, that can work, and that will make management easy. And I think that is what they are trying to work out. And I think we'll talk more about this, but that's the challenges that I've seen in this model.
It's interesting because I think both of you were saying that we really are in that hybrid phase across the board. But it's interesting because when you talk to people, and we can talk a bit about how people are deciding what to do next, but we're seeing a lot of people who are thinking that the next normal is going to look a little differently. They're gonna either want to go right back to the office or stay put. What have been a couple of things that, other than the incredible resilience of the profession and our ability to pivot, what have been a couple of maybe hidden wins that we've seen from moving to hybrid or moving from remote? Kirsty, you've lived through this in Ontario. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, the big thing that I would start by emphasizing is just the unevenness of this experience, which I think we're all alive to at this point. And there's some really great data and really good studies coming out right now for people to kind of grasp onto, to contextualize the experience they're having at their own firm. But there's a huge study that just came out of the States looking at 30,000 people. And it found 32% of people never want to go back to the office. Those folks have acclimatized to work from home. Maybe they've got a slightly bigger house. They were able to carve out a nice home office. Those tend to be people maybe who have young children, people who had a lengthy or expensive commute. So there's, a substantial portion of your workforce and frankly, the workforce generally, that's really happy with working from home and is going to be resistant to changing. On the other hand, the study also found 21% of people literally never want to work at their home again another day. And some demographic differences, right, play into that, certainly. So you've got, empty nesters, people who are single, people who perhaps paid a lot of money, right? I'm in Toronto, to live downtown close to their office and have less space, and carving out a home office was not as enjoyable an experience as it has been for some other people who perhaps have more space. And so, as we start to think about the next normal, we start to think about where we're going to go here. I think the thing we have to grapple with is that we've got these divergent experiences that we're going to have to somehow reconcile and bring together in a principled way in order to get us, into a fully functioning model that works for our firm. And one of the smartest things I've read about all of this so far is really just that we should all start to grapple with and recognize it's not going to be one size fits all. Different law firms are going to do different things. I think the best law firms will look at their business, their clients, their services, start to really wrap their head around the different models that are available to them, right? Can you work fully remotely? Some businesses can, some businesses can't. Do you think you have a hope of moving everybody back to the way things were in the before times and getting everybody back into the office? Again, some of that has to do with your staff, some of that has to do with how people are feeling about the pandemic. A lot of that has to do with how you deliver services and where your clients want to meet you. So there's a lot to consider and a lot to kind of feed into it. And, the good news, as I said, is there's a lot of information out there and a lot of smart people are writing about this and thinking about this. And so there is good information to start to help you plan your next normal.
Judy, you asked about what some hidden wins have been. And I know we're going to talk about culture later on, but one of the things to me that has been the greatest win is humanizing the firms. My experience working in a very large law firm when I started out, I wouldn't have talked about my family life. I wouldn't have talked about my kids. I wouldn't have talked about, you certainly wouldn't have wanted my kid wandering through in the background. I think we've all become much, much more forgiving and accepting of the fact that we are all human beings. We have these lives. Those lives are important to us. We deal with kids. I know I'm often on a call with one particular lawyer who's got two elderly parents that he's trying to manage at the same time. And occasionally one of them will wander through. And so we see now we have been given a window into people's lives. For some people, that's been very stressful. So when you've got, when you're dealing with somebody who hasn't, as Kirsty said, been able to carve out a private space to work and their bed is in the background or their bathroom door is open, you're being let into people's intimate private spaces in a way that we've never seen before at work. But at the same time, we've also been allowed a glimpse of people's lives. And I think that has given us, as a profession, humanity that maybe was missing. I think back to that time when there was that BBC report that went completely viral about that man giving his news report and his child wandering in her walker and then his wife sneaking in to grab the child. Nowadays, nobody would even care. That wouldn't have been viral at all. That was just everybody's life for the last year. So that's one of the wins, that humanizing of our profession, that I don't want to give up. I think we need to keep that.
Go ahead, Kirsty.
Well, I think another win, and this, not the personal touchy-feely stuff, but, in shifting, however you shifted from in-person to remote or hybrid or whatever you've done, it's given us all a chance to really think about how we do the work we do, right? And so with every change is an opportunity to say, can we do this more effectively? Can we do this more efficiently? Should we, is there technology that can facilitate this? So there have been probably too many, for most people's comfort level, chances to revisit some of those basic questions about how we deliver services. And whatever your capacity or appetite to dive into that, there are chances and opportunities to look at stuff anew and really build the firm you want to be living in and running in the long term.
That is a nice perk, though, is that some of the sacred cow areas, or some of those untouchable areas where we've done this because we've always done this, and then they go by the wayside in a day. And that it doesn't matter which firm you're in. If you had one of those inefficient systems that was just a legacy because one senior member of the firm always did it that way, or because that was just the way it was always done, those are gone and they're not coming back, right? Hong, any other hidden benefits you've seen?
I echo Karen's and Christy's take on the humanization of our workplace. And I think Another thing that I want to really explore later on is like that psychological safety. Like it's different to let people have a peek into our personal life, but are we it's like, can we truly speak our opinions, especially when it comes to the work schedule that we want? Will we be honest about like, our preferences in a way that sort of aligned with management goal of having the policies that they want for our remote work situation? So that's something that I look forward to a deeper discussion on later on.
Yeah, and we'll definitely go there because there is one clear piece in all the data, and Kirsty's pointed to one study, and there are many out there, but it is absolutely clear that the higher up in the hierarchy, the less aligned your vision on the return to normal likely is with your associates, your clerks, and your staff. That's just a universal, and we're hearing it in law. I mean, I can just tell you anecdotally, I asked a lawyer recently who runs a boutique firm, what's your next normal future state perfect vision? And the response back, and it's not a criticism, but the response back was 5 days a week in the office, all of us. And that's knowing that some of the juniors have bought houses outside of the city, or who may have different views if surveyed, and they haven't gotten to that point about surveys, which might shift the thinking there, or might just lead to somebody saying, that's okay, I think this firm needs to go in a particular direction. If we lose talent over it, that might be part of the equation, but there are going to be people who are going to want 5 days back in the office. So there are going to be places where you can build a culture based on that. But interesting to see those differences of mindset so far. Hong, did you want to add?
Yeah, I want to mention that I got a few phone calls from lawyers, from associates expressing like a conflict between like they're foreseeing a system where, like two-tier system where, you have the people who come in the office more often and they're like, will I get more projects? Or will I get more workload? Like, will my workload increase because I'm there? And then so like, or, there's also the fear that the people who work remotely, like more than, will they have more like there will be I guess, an unfairness to that system. So that's something that has been raised by, I think, more younger like staff people and associates, when we have a hybrid system, whether or not there will be a two-tier system that will sort of like develop because of that dynamic. So that's something that I think will, decision makers or, management will have to consider when we decide to go, we'll have a more permanent hybrid plan.
It's a perfect example of how arbitrariness can really impact on junior associate career development or on law firm development. I remember being at a large firm at one point, and they had a summer student list, and the person who was first on the list got all the work. Like all of it. The poor person. It was clear, and you can see my last name. I sailed through that summer. Somebody else was working weekends, evenings, all the rest of it. And so people have to be really deliberate about how they make sure that these little biases are avoided in developing processes to make sure that you're maximizing work, maximizing opportunities. And so when we turn to work from home, or to a hybrid model, there are different pieces of that puzzle that we're definitely going to have to keep in mind. So let's turn to that second theme, because I think we've got a good lay of the land now. We, at least in North America, we're mostly either working from home or hybrid. Some are on that shift, getting to that cusp of a voluntary return to work, but we've still got a ways to go. And so let's talk a little bit about managing people and teams remotely, a few tips around that. And while we're at it, there is a first question that's come in, and thank you, about what to do with vulnerable clients in this environment where you are continuing to work remotely. So I'm going to flush that one out at the start, which is that there has been a real access to justice discrepancy that's happened through this time. Not all clients have access to Zoom or to any other electronic equivalent. Not all clients are able to meet. I was on a panel with an Indigenous lawyer a few months ago who described how an on-reserve client had to go to one particular room in one particular person's house where there were many people together because that was required for various reasons. And it just meant privilege and confidentiality were sort of not quite fully where you would want them to be, but also in terms of community spread, in terms of all of this, real inequities due to a lack of sustained internet connectivity across this particular locale. And so we know that there are barriers there. At LawPro, when we are dealing though with clients virtually, not everyone will be comfortable with Zoom. Not everybody will be familiar with Zoom. So just a reminder that on practicepro.ca, on our COVID-19 resources, we have a slew of resources to help. One is a checklist to help you identify your client and get to know your client. We've also talked frequently, though, when we go out and talk about working with people remotely, that you're going to potentially need to create several meetings to onboard somebody so that they feel that trust relationship with you. Because for some, this is not normal. You know, for some people, this is fantastic. This is so much easier. But for many, this is different. And when somebody is sharing and confiding with you around a family law matter, around something deeply personal, around a will plan, and we've seen this, we've seen wills being drafted by Zoom from a hospital bed. These are difficult times. And so you need to take the time. And in terms of undue influence and other risks, there are ways to take the time to make sure that you know that these people who you are representing are comfortable speaking with you. You can ask people to turn screens around to make sure that they have privacy. You can ask them if they feel comfortable proceeding. You can ask them if they can Zoom you back at a separate time, just so that you can have a time where no one else is in the room. There are lots of ways to try to make sure that vulnerable clients are served as best as possible. But remotely, we're also facing challenges in our firms and in our structures and, you know, across working with colleagues. So I know that, you know, when we start with this, Kirsty, you built out a firm and then you kind of went to straight remote, if I've got the chronology right. Why don't you tell us a bit about what you saw and a few practical tips to get us moving?
Yeah, so we launched like 2 years ago, I think, or something like that, with four people total. And then over the course of the pandemic, we've expanded to 10. So we've onboarded lots of people. We transitioned to remote work. We just moved offices. So our physical space has changed as well. So lots of changes for us. And I think, you know, I return perpetually to those truisms of management, right? You have to be empathetic. You have to know your people. You have to meet them where they are. You want people to feel supported. You want to attract the best talent. You want to get the best people doing the work. And then you want to empower them to do what they're good at. And so I think those, you know, the basic truths of management and leadership have not changed, even though everything else has. We still need to have a plan. We still need to, you know, lead, and we need to communicate that plan to people and provide them with stability and the assurances or the knowledge that we can provide to people to empower them to react to very uncertain times, right? And continue to do the work that they want to do. Law firms are all about people. They don't work without people. And there have been a lot of changes to how you manage. If you've moved from a exclusively or almost exclusively in-person model to a virtual model, you know, for me, I always did the walk around. That was my management tool. You get up, you have a coffee, you pay attention as you walk by. You can tell who's busy, you can tell who's struggling, you can tell who's chatting, you can tell who has some time, who looks up and smiles, who looks concerned. You know, you have to think about, I think you have to think about employees, I would say it's like an iceberg, right? So the part that they're showing you is not necessarily the whole truth, but it's not a bad start. And so when you move into a virtual environment, you know, one of the things I found is that the time commitment it takes to get that read on how people are doing is much greater. So you can't just do a walk by and see how people look. You can't see if they look engaged or busy or free or whatever. You've got to get on a call. You've got to put in the FaceTime. You've got to kind of get past that, you know, the Teams face that everyone puts on their brightest face when they answer their Teams call. And you have to spend some time with people and really talk to them about how they're doing, how the work's going, what's going on that's getting in the way of the work, what's going on that helps them with the work. And again, you know, you want to reiterate as much as possible those connections, right? And continually be building connections between the people you're working with and the mission and the values of the firm that they work for, their connection to the work, their connection to the clients. And I think, you know, one thing that's been challenging is building connections between team members, right? And I say that as somebody who has onboarded 2/3 of our team, right? So we have 2/3 of our team maybe a couple of them have met in person here and there, but we have never had our whole team together since since the pandemic began, right? So I think we're going to do a bit of a go around and talk about some of the issues we're seeing and facing, and then some of the tips or the tools that we can suggest to people to deal with them. So the one I'll start off with is building trust between teammates. How do you facilitate relationship building? How do you facilitate trust building between teammates? Which is of course essential, because if people don't trust each other, they're not going to confess the mistake they made. They're not going to ask for help. They're not going to put their hand up with a brilliant idea they have that will make everyone's life better, right? Without trust, your team is not working optimally. And so building that trust has to be something that your leadership team is dedicating time and energy to. So some of the things that we have done that have worked well for us, we've implemented a workshop meeting every week. So, lawyers used to just pop into each other's offices, brainstorm, bounce ideas off one another. That's not something that's easy to replicate in a virtual setting. People are a little bit more reticent to, make that Teams call, pop up into your office at home and bother you. They can't walk by and see if you're free and then therefore able to chat, or if you're really, really busy and engaged in drafting or something. So we've just set up a standing meeting every week where the lawyers can come. If they've got a bit of a finicky file or a challenging file, they can collaborate with the group. They can get each other's expertise. And I think, that part is great for clients and it's great for the files, but it also knits together the team, right? It reminds people that they're supported. It reminds people that they're not alone in this, that there's other people who are doing the same work and who they can count on. And that I think has been really productive and lovely for the lawyers, and has helped them get to know each other in a period where a lot of them are new. We do the same thing with the admin team. So once a week we gather the admin team and we say, look, tell me something that went really well this week. And so people are able to share the wins, they're able to share the knowledge. If they've figured something out, everybody doesn't have to learn it for themselves, right? So we're sharing all of that information. And then, on the other hand, what's something that was really irritating or stupid or didn't work because we're remote? And so people can kind of bring that to the team. And again, you have a conversation, because we've got new people who all come from great other firms where they've learned lots of different ways of doing things. We can gather all of that expertise and have people work together to hash out, the correct solution for our firm in this moment. Training is a great way to bring people together. It might seem like people are busy and overwhelmed, and so training might not seem like an intuitive thing to do right now, but it gives people a shared experience. It brings them together, gives them a point of conversation to talk about something they've done together. And then again, right, you can ask people to work in small teams, groups of 2 or 3, take something out of the training that they can identify that they want to roll out across the firm that they think would be good for everybody. And then again, give them that chance to build a relationship, give them that chance to apply their knowledge and their expertise and make things work a little better at the same time. And I think that stands true, for any process change that you're seeing, and there's a lot of them right now. Task not just one person, right? Put somebody in partnership with somebody else, let them build that relationship, let them build that team a little bit at a time. 2 brains are better than 1. It'll be faster, it'll be better. You'll get a great process solution out of it, and you'll have a stronger team at the end of it. So those are just a couple of suggestions for bringing people together in a problem-solving sort of way, right? The social stuff is great. And I think, social hours and virtual coffees, all of that stuff has its place. But I think being quite deliberate about collaboration and opportunities to bring people together to work as a team and not just socialize are really important if you're going to build a cohesive team in this moment. So Karen or Hong or Judah, any issues you want to flag?
Well, I don't want to flex an issue so much as just say there are a couple of things that we've seen that have helped. I agree 100% about getting people to collaborate. So we've worked with firms where we've got them using online collaboration tools like Miro. We happen to use Miro quite a bit so that we get people brainstorming together, trying to solve problems. You can break people out into small groups. I think that's a really great solution, and putting 2 or 3 people on a project that you might otherwise have only put 1 person on pre-COVID is a great way just to get people thinking together. But when you can also provide them, I know we're going to talk a little bit about tech later, but when you can provide them with some collaboration tools, it's a hugely valuable experience experience for them, and it gets them out there actually working with each other physically in something like Miro. You can each grab your own sticky notes, you can map out a process, you can brainstorm. It's really effective as a collaboration tool. The other thing that we've seen firms use and that we work with our clients on is really how to take work and make it visible to everybody. So, when you talk about the 5 things that teams need to be effective, we mentioned psychological safety a little bit, and I think we may be doing that more. Dependability and this trustworthiness, Kirsty, that you talked about is so important, but structure and clarity, and also meaning. So people need to know that those little tasks that they're working on actually have some meaning, even if those tasks themselves seem like they're menial. They're the grunt work. They're just that stuff that the junior has to get done. But when people can see a process, they can see a matter from start to finish and see how their little tiny pieces of the puzzle fit in, it gives them some of that structure and clarity, and it gives them a sense of purpose, of meaning. So they understand why their work has to be done, even if it doesn't seem that important. And sometimes people just need to know that that work is appreciated. So we've had clients start to set up matter management boards, which is essentially like a Kanban board where you break down your legal matter into the various phases. The tasks all go into columns based on the phase that they're in, and people can see where the work is. And the brain science definitely shows when people see where everybody is working, where they see a whole matter from start to finish, they are much more inclined to work together, and there is a much greater feeling of meaning, of clarity. People understand the process, and they have a much better picture of how they fit into a team. So it helps to build up that feeling of being part of a team and working towards a client's objective.
What's really great about that, and I'm going to turn to Hong in a second, but what you're both talking about empathy and about collaboration, it works on the staff level. But if you're a true solo here coming to this event, these tips work for your client collaboration as well. They work really well. If you can show a client the map of a journey, it doesn't, even if you can't predict how long each stage is going to take, like in litigation where you just can't predict, to be able to show them a visual that takes you through the first step is preparing our research, learning your file, determining how we're going to whether there's a cause of action, and then if we're going to start litigation, here's where we start, and here are the next steps that have to happen with potential motions. Just that visual for a regular client who is not sophisticated to see that, to understand it, to then go back to with your client. These sorts of either Kanban or visual aids, these types of supports enhance that collaboration and allow people to row together on the same page. And so really helpful tips that you can also start to think about, not just for your team, but also how this helps to create your client empathy, your client relationships, and reducing risks of misunderstandings along the way. Hong, what have you been seeing?
So I've been seeing, it's more in line with what Christy mentioned about building trust, and more specifically like that, maintaining that same level of communication while working remotely. And I've heard from associate, complaining about having to submit weekly reports to their superiors, but then there's no follow-up, like one-on-one follow-up after that. And so there's like this feeling that that they're supposed to write down like what they've done, but there's no follow-up after that. And I think that lack of communication is a breakdown. Like it makes it hard to build that trust and really understand like the people, like, lawyers or staff struggle or barriers, and try to address that, try to provide that ongoing support and training and supervision when there's not that one-on-one communication. And I think probably my tip would be like to still have one-on-one communication, check in with your individual subordinates, whether, even if you have weekly staff meetings, or even if you have like the, a workspace where they could just join on a voluntary basis to socialize. I think that is very important, especially for younger, I would say for newer lawyers and staff, where they do need that ongoing support and supervision to make sure that you provide that. And the way to do is to talk with them individually and build that trust, and have that, that way they feel safe to approach you with a barrier, with a challenge that they have that may affect their work performance. So that's what I see on the ground, is that sort of like communication. Like, it seems like, there's so many things going on. There's a lot of apps, but there's not that one-on-one check-in. And I think that's something that I want to impart.
And everyone's super busy, Hong. So I think you've hit the nail on the head. Everyone's busy. I've heard these horribly sad and ironic stories of juniors declining to meet with mentors because they're so busy, declining to meet their partner because they're so busy. And the partner saying, I don't know what to do to bring them back in, but like, we need to continue the conversations. And so, I think these are great reminders that, everyone's pushing the gas pedal. And at times that can feel very isolating. But on the flip side, the technology is there, including things as easy as your phone. But you can schedule in times to make sure that you're able to connect and reconnect and feel like you are part of the team. But part of that requires that everyone in the mix in these relationships is prioritizing that. Because there will always be work, but sometimes you need those checkpoints. So Kirsty, I think you were going to add, but I jumped in.
That's okay. No, I think separate and apart from sort of trust between colleagues and facilitating the teamwork element of it, there's a real challenge, and it's been extraordinarily difficult to maintain and build trust in leadership. It's always different, that's always a challenge that you have to foster trust in the leadership of a firm. But I think in a situation like we've been in, where it's dynamic, it's evolving, it's hard to make commitments that you can live with, that will last the length of the pandemic or the length of the challenge. And so we have to, again, just be really deliberate about creating those opportunities to build trust in the leadership. And, we'll talk about values and culture and how important those are to that exercise. But, it's always good advice to make promises you can keep. Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't be afraid to acknowledge uncertainty. This is not a situation people have lived through before. This is not a situation that we are, everyone's sort of walking and talking at the same time here. We're not in the old world. And so, you have to communicate regularly with folks. You have to, and one-on-ones I think have their place, but I think there is a very real need in, mid or larger size organizations for regular leadership communication that sets the stage, provide people with good information. I think it is, it's really helpful, and there's a real opportunity for firms to be a filter for some of the insanity out there, and really, share with your team what's the information you're looking to make the decisions about the next normal or the normal after that. Where you find incredible information, share that with your team, right? Bring everybody's anxiety levels down. Take that piece of this work away from people if you can, and share what you're looking at, right? Find good information on which to base your decisions, and then share it with people so that everybody's on the same page. Everybody's coming at this, empowered with the same information. And then, again, we'll circle back to values, but this question of telling people really clearly, what are the anchors for any decision that we will make as a firm? Who are we? If you can tell the folks that you work with who you are as a firm, you're going to tell them a lot about what the possible directions that you could move in are. And that will hopefully avoid situations like I think we're all seeing anecdotally, and we're certainly seeing it with clients because we work in employment law and help a lot of executives in employment law matters. Where you are planning a full return to office, but you find out 6 of your staff have houses in Windsor now, and how is that all going to work? So again, I think the more communication you can have with people, the more stakes in the ground you can put about what are possible models that we're entertaining, what are models that we're not entertaining. This is not what this is going to look like in a year. Again, you're just helping people lower the anxiety. It'll make them more productive. It'll make them happier. It'll take the anxiety away, and help them really build some faith and trust that they're in good hands, and that the leadership has this under control and is thinking this through, and will make good decisions that will impact them positively.
So
I just wanted to jump in because one of the things you mentioned really resonated with me. When you look at research on what makes teams effective, one of the things that makes them effective is trust in leadership that they get from understanding how decisions are made. They don't have to even agree with the decisions. They don't have to have consensus. They just have to understand that there is a decision-making process and it's going to be followed. And once they understand that there is a process, they will get information and that process will be followed, then a lot of the anxiety goes away and you end up with a much more cohesive group of people.
Oh, if your process has integrity and you tell people, this is the information we're going to look at, these are the values we're going to live by, this is the roadmap for where we think we're going, and it might change because this is dynamic and we don't know, what the future holds. If you give people at least that much, they know you're in it with them. They know that you've got their backs. They know what you're thinking about and how you're going to act. And if they can predict how you act in some measure, they can relax a little bit, right? And I think everybody would be well served if they could relax a little bit. This particular
Yeah, I think that buy-in from employees is very important to like any decision-making process. And I mean, they may not necessarily agree with the decision, but when you have their buy-in because they feel like they are part of that process, because there's transparency, the expectations have been set. I think that's very important to make them feel like they're part of the team and they're not just like some minions or pawns. So I think that buy-in is very important in making them feel like they belong in this organization and they will work for this organization in a way that is meaningful to them. So I think you all hit the nail on the head.
So I'm hearing lots around radical transparency, both for now and for our next normal, and some real empathy, some real surveying what your own staff is hoping for without necessarily being tied to it. Is there for getting to that next level? I think that, for Ontario law firms, and one of the reasons we planned this event for sort of late June, is we're going to be making these decisions through the summer. And, there's a bit of a timing hiccup here. And I think we should just address it here. People are tired. So Kirsty, what does that mean in terms of, how do we get to a recharge state so that people don't feel like they were burned by the employer, having given all they could before we get to whatever the next challenge looks like?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we have tried to do advanced planning, right? We have tried to communicate to people at least a month, if not more, in advance if we were going to make any changes. Obviously, the first round of changes were a whirlwind of frenetic activity, but after that, we've communicated to people, for example, that we will be remote until September, no matter what. People want to come into the office, that's great, they have that ability, but up until September, we're predominantly remote, right? And even if the COVID situation changed and it was possible for us to go back to the office, we're going to stick by that promise and we're going to let people make some plans and operate according to that. I do think people are tired of the next normal and the next normal and the normal after that. And I think, it is a good idea for firms to take some time right now and wrap their heads around end state, and do some real thinking about what's on the table and what's not, in terms of the model that might be in use for your firm going forward. So, I think it's important to look back and take some time to gather people and talk about, whatever your pre-pandemic state of affairs was, probably in person. What was great about that? What were the strengths of that model? What were the weaknesses? What was kind of awful, but you lived with it? What was really excellent? What did that look like? And get honest about it. And then, we've all had this great experiment that we've been able to live through, where we got to try something totally different that none of us would ever have thrown our firms into this kind of change and disarray on this timeline. I don't think we would have. So, look honestly at that. Some things were good, some things were bad, some things changed for the worse, some things changed for the better, but get real about what that looked like for your firm, what it looked like for your clients, what it looked like for the business, what it looked like for staff. And then I just can't emphasize enough the importance of engaging people. Your people are your firm. And so if you are operating without understanding where they are at, you are creating huge risks that you will either lose top talent, that you will, reduce productivity, you will have people be disengaged, like all of those problems that you can create by not properly communicating with your staff and engaging them in your processes, are things you're going to have to live with for a long time. So I think, if we can all look at tools, I think surveys can be really helpful. Certainly in a larger organization, or even, we've got 10 people and I use surveys regularly to get temperature, right? Or to see trends. Like there's interesting things that can come up when you kind of see 10 people's responses to a question all at once. So surveys can be really valuable and they're not that difficult to do. There's lots of great examples, templates, all of that stuff is on the internet, right? You can find a survey and adapt it to your needs in 15 minutes if you want to. Interviews also have their place, and I think allow you to really dive deep into what people are thinking. And we've talked about how we've got this kind of window into people's whole lives now that you can't really shut, right? You know what you know, and so you have to react to it and you have to absorb it. And I think, when you're going through surveys and interviews and things like that, one of the things that is going to be really challenging is to help people think through the entirety of the picture, right? So you may have, I talk to friends who are thrilled to go back to the office. They can't wait to go back to the office. They want to go back to the office yesterday. And then you're like, okay, that's great, but like, how are you going to get there? Well, that's devastating and super anxiety inducing. And I can't possibly get on the TTC. And it's like, well, then do you really want to be back at the office? Like, can you talk to me about this whole picture here? Like, let's put the pieces together and really think through where you're at. And, similarly, if you're talking about different models, cohorting is attractive, I think, for a variety of reasons. But, I think it's important to start to get clear about what the purposes are. Like, are you cohorting so people are having social connections? In which case, maybe you want to let people choose their cohorts and have them get together with the people they like best at the firm, remind them who their friends are, give them that social outlet if that's what your purpose is. If it's about the fact that some of your processes are not working well in a remote environment and you need those processes done in person, then you've got to, knit through who are the people involved in that process, and they have to come to the office together, right? So again, really starting to wrap your head around what are the models that your firm is actually willing to entertain in the long term? What are the goals? What are your benchmarks for success? Once you start to get that stuff in place, I think you can talk about the next door normal and the normal after that if you have to, but it'll be coherent, right? And people will start to be reassured. They'll start to see the road, right? It'll start to be a bit more intuitive for people, and I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think we have to work hard at eliminating anxiety in people, and uncertainty creates a great deal of anxiety. So I love the idea that you said, no matter what happens, we're going to be remote until September and we'll figure it out then. I also think this is a great time for people to do something like start having regular after action reviews. Take the strategy you would take for after a matter when you have an after action review and say, okay, first of all, let's think about, as Kirsty said, let's think about what we did pre-COVID. What worked well, what didn't work well, and why? What do we want to keep? What do we no longer need to keep? And then do the same thing for this period during COVID and have essentially an after action review of your pandemic work habits. So what did we expect would happen when we all went remotely? And have a big, you can do this over a couple of different meetings, right? It gets a chance. It's a really good opportunity to actually use something like Miro and get people throwing ideas up on sticky notes. Like, what did we think was going to happen? And then the next stage is, well, what actually happened? How did our clients react? How did we react? What was it like? What was different for the lawyers versus some of the support staff? And what was different for the juniors versus the seniors? What worked really well and why did it work well? Because you want to take whatever worked well and bring it with you into the future. And then the final question is, well, what didn't work and how can we change it? So if you kind of take a series over the summer and do 4 meetings, what did we expect would happen? The next meeting, what actually happened? Then the meeting after that, well, what worked well and why? And then the final one is what didn't work and how can we change it? And by the end of the summer, you can start to have in shape a really good plan for your team.
And at the heart of it, and it's fascinating to hear these conversations all coalescing because we talk about technology, we talk about processes, we talk about how we've had to upend everything, but at the core of it, we're talking people first here. People have been talking about, oh, we need to go digital first, or we need to go this first. No, it's people first. It's people first all the way through. And really what that means is that we're really talking about values and we're talking about culture. And that's where people come in. So Hong, we're going to turn to that now, like really focus in, even though all the way through that's been the dominant theme so far. So let's talk culture, because really cultures came under threat a little bit when some people like shifted from water cooler cultures to disparate all over. And so some have fared better than others. Some have learned, some have felt like it's just really dented the culture. But we also have a real opportunity over the couple of months to think about how we're going to either rebuild cultures or maintain, sustain, change our culture. So why don't I ask you to kick us off? You've done some great writing about this, and there's an article in the resources that come with today's program from Hong on this.
Yeah, I think now more than ever, it's important for firms and organizations to build and maintain a good workplace culture, especially because now that our workforce is, scattered all over the place and people are working remotely in different areas. I just want to start off by talking about a survey conducted by Atlas International, which is a global customer service and digital solutions provider. That survey found that about 51%, the majority of the respondents felt that they were less connected to their company's culture while working remotely because of the pandemic. And they listed some reasons, but one of the top reasons for feeling this disconnection had to do with not being able to have small chats, small talks, and interaction, face-to-face interaction with their colleagues, and also not being able to collaborate with a team. Like this is isolation. They were isolated. They didn't collaborate, and then that lack of separation between their work life and their home life was a big dent in their feeling of connection to the organization. And also other studies, even, I think Christy mentioned that other studies of job seekers found that job candidates put culture very high in their list of attributes to look for in a new employer. So culture, from the employee perspective, is very, very important to their identity, to their having meaning in their work. So, a lot of people, think that culture is confined to a physical space, like it's the company picnic, whatever it is. But really, it's about it's not physical. It's you could think about culture as like how an organization make decision, right? How employees feel about their experience at work. Do they like their job? Do they feel safe not safe physically, but psychologically? Do they feel psychologically safe? Do they feel valued? Do they look forward to waking up and going to work? And if they do all of those things, then that that's a really good work culture that they have. And those feelings are all influenced by the culture that firm or the organization set. And studies have done the Harvard Law Review, the Harvard Business Review. They have done studies to show how culture affect engagement, motivation, creativity, and it has there's no dispute about that. So it's important that managers and leaders maintain and strive to have that culture for their staff. And creating this culture doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like you don't just wake up and think that, oh, you don't do nothing and so culture will be created on its own. I personally, from my experience working with firms, when you are not intentional in creating that culture, the culture tend to be toxic. Like it's an intentional act that you have to work toward. That means that you have to have values. And a lot of firms do have values. They have their mission, vision, and values. And those values inform the culture. But I think a lot of values are directed toward clients and not toward employees. So I think this is a good time for firm to really rethink their values and say, I want values that also sort of like set the foundation for the interaction with employees, not with clients. So I'm not going to go over the list of values, but that's something that is very important. It's like, how do we shift our values to centered not just on the clients, but also on the employees, so that we are cohesive, that we are, they feel they're part of a team and they feel like they belong to something higher than themselves. So that's something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm sure our panelists will be able to share some tips on creating that culture.
Well, it's great because I think you're hitting the nail on the head there. It can really inform everything from the top down. We've already heard about how when you're delegating, you want to explain the why. Where does this fit in? And there are places where it's dump and dive, right? And the difference is astounding to the person who's getting the work about how they're feeling about the work, seeing the value of the work, being able to know how it's going to help and know that they're going to be able to get some feedback and participate in a win down the road. Karen, you've been working with firms from across North America right now, and I've heard from some at the senior levels of the profession worried that their firms are not going to make it through, that their culture is being eroded, that people are hiding. They're feeling socially isolated, so they're focused on their bottom line billing targets, and the rest is going by the wayside. So how have firms been fighting back against that risk, be they small or big?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because one of the things that I would love to hear more about from Hong is how she encourages firms to set these values. Because I believe that if firms don't have a culture and a value, they're going to be leaking really good quality talent right now. I know from a number of firms that we've talked to, of the large Canadian firms, they are already losing their mid-level associates, and they're losing them to American firms that are calling up and saying, you know what, we're staying remote. We're going to pay you a New York salary. You can continue to live in Kingston or Toronto or Ottawa or Calgary, and you can work for us. And without that connection of culture that keeps people tied to a firm, if all that's tying your associates to your firm is their salary, then you are losing them almost immediately. And I know I've heard from at least 4 or 5 of the major firms that they are losing associates to New York, and most recently to a California firm. So what we've seen in terms of firms trying to build this culture up is to have the types of meetings that Kirsty was talking about, regular drop-ins where they can share ideas, making those meetings mandatory, so that not that people have to share, but that they at least have to show up and participate every week. Because, and actually matter management boards are a good way to do this. If you have your firm's work or your practice group's work up on a matter management board, then you can have what you used to do, maybe your firm would do, used to have like a stand-up meeting where everybody would get together and say, this is what we're doing, this is what I've done, this is what you're doing. But you can actually do those even on a virtual board. So if you've got your board up there and everybody's looking at a shared screen, you can go around the group and say, hey, what are you working on today? What are you going to work on next week? And what do you need help with? And that kind of constant interaction kept positive and facilitated, because it does take facilitation. I think Hong mentioned, if you don't intentionally create a positive culture, then a toxic culture can grow. And we've all seen how in our profession, how easily toxic cultures grow, because the focus is on competition and on, billable hours and making partner. Where we've seen firms be successful is having those types of regular meetings and keeping those meetings focused on how do we interact, how can we share information better, how can we provide you, junior associate, with the next step that you need, setting up more intentional mentorship opportunities for people, and not even always within your own firm, but networking juniors so that they feel connected to a group of people, not just to 1 or 2 partners. I know firms have really struggled with creating the mentorship relationships when they bring on new people, because it is so difficult and everybody gets buried and busy, and some people are introverts anyway. So if they're not in an office environment, they're not necessarily reaching out. I would actually love to hear what Kirsty and Hong have to say about how they see the culture developing around and mentorship developing too, because those are areas where, when we talk to clients, they are working hard to do it, and not everybody has the right solution. I can't say, this firm has a great solution to it, this firm has struggled with it, because I think most firms are struggling with how to create those relationships right now.
So why don't we start with Hong, who can talk a little bit about the smaller firm settings and bigger around those professional relationships that really need to be solidified, because even a solo with a clerk, you need to be tight, and that's going to have shifted over the last few months. And then Kirsty's in a sort of small, medium-sized firm. We can go there, and then I'll add after that. So Hong, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just from working with, from different size firms, leadership really plays a big role in building and maintaining that culture. So when you have a leader or a manager who really cares about performance as opposed to the people doing the performance, then of course, the values are not, that's a different set of values. So I think having the right people in leadership is very important. So it starts with that promotion, that filling up that leadership vacancy is very important, and who will sort of chart the parameter for that culture. So I think it's important that the leaders have the leaders believe in the values that the firm, want, whether it's, for me, relationship is very important. Relationship and people is way more important than policies and performance. Performance is important, but the people, the performance only happen when you have great people. So having leaders understand that. And so for me, when I speak with firms, I always talk to them about their bottom lines. Like, do you having to hire and fire people all the time, it's very costly. So I talk to them from that. I was like, your job should be to maintain talent and to nurture that talent, and because they will do great things. And so from there, like, we build values based on like, that is like your job is to make your employees happy here. That way they stay here. They don't, the knowledge base is here with your firm. And then from there, we talk about psychological safety, like being able to build a workplace where people can dissent, where people can disagree is very important to having that dynamic workplace and that engaging workplace. Because, I have been in meetings where, with firm meetings, with staff meeting, where staff or associates don't say anything. Like, the only people who talk in that room are the managers or the top people, and that is not right. Like, there should be disagreement, there should be, and that makes that workplace dynamic. So we're talking about psychological safety. We're talking about, having leaders in the right people in leadership. And in terms of the value, for me, having teaching them on how to sort of like recognize and appreciate their staff is very important, because some of them believe that it's sufficient just to say thank you or good job. And recognizing hard work, but a lot of staff or a lot of people that I work with feel like that's really not, that's like, it's like a quid pro quo, like I do something and then I get this, but it's not acknowledging their worth as human beings. So it's working with firms to sort of like, how do I acknowledge them? That means that you have to have a conversation with them. You have to engage with them on a personal level in order to acknowledge, and appreciate them, in a way that is just, not just like, oh, thank you for a great job, which has to happen too. And then, virtually, I think it's very hard to do this when you don't see the product, right away, or you don't see like all the work that's put into that work product. You only see the final product. And so we have, so I would tell firm, like on a Monday, like have people share their accomplishment or share like, what they did on the weekend to build that culture. So there's many ways to do it virtually. But it's really hard because like when you have leaders who don't believe, in that, or who value things differently, is trying to turn their mind around, is trying to instill different values in them. That's like the hardest part that I've seen.
And Kirsty's had the added challenge because, when you know somebody from before the pandemic, you know them. And so you've got that relationship already. And, maybe people get a COVID pass at times, but when you're onboarding or when there's new hires coming on and you don't have any in office, it's even that much more challenging to maintain or build that culture of where there's mutual goals and shared values and the ability to celebrate wins along the way. So Kirsty, what are some of the things you've been doing?
I mean, okay, so just generally, first of all, I think values are not as hard as people think they are sometimes. I think people sometimes start to think that they're magic and mystical and really hard to suss out what your values are. But frankly, especially in a situation that it has been as changing and dynamic as this, every time you have a change, every time you buy a new piece of technology, you hire a new person, anything that happens, frankly, at your firm is telling you something about your values. Your values are all there. It's about, how you practice, how you live, how you treat each other. The values just exist, and you can change them if you need to change them. That's sometimes a very good idea. But, it's not hard to discover them if you pay attention and you start to look back at some of the decisions you've made recently. What were the animating factors? Why did you do what you did? As soon as you can answer the question, why you made a particular change, you have some insight into what your values are. So, I think we have articulated our values, right? And I think we found some cute and snappy ways to do that, and some probably more serious and sustained ways to do them. There is a Lizzo quote that we frequently cite that says, "If I'm shining, everybody's going to shine," which sort of encapsulates how we run our firm and how we work together, how we lift each other up. you deliver excellence by being excellent, not only yourself, but in collaboration with other people. And so that's who we are. That's how we try to be. I think other ways that you can kind of maintain your values have to do with consistency, have to do with communication. And I think, again, there's special values that are kind of unique to your firm, but there's a lot of values that are just values that you kind of have to have, or a culture that you have to have a functioning workplace, right? So again, there's great writing on this. You do not have to recreate the wheel. There's a book called First Break All the Rules that was put out by Gallup that synthesizes a lot of information about how to create a positive culture that attracts talent, that maintains talent, that empowers good managers. And I think, one of the things we all need to be doing at this point in the pandemic to kind of fight against burnout and support the people who have been doing that work of holding the culture together at the firm is to look at some of the things Gallup suggests you need, right? So Gallup says people need to know what's expected of them. They need to know that they have the tools they need to do their job. They need to be recognized and praised for good work. They need to know somebody at work cares about them as a person, not just as a cog in a machine or a profit center, but as a person. And they need to feel supported and have what they need to learn and grow. They need other stuff too, but those are the ones that have to do with the sort of people management piece. And I think from a leadership perspective, what's important to do at this stage is to take a deep look around at your team and figure out who is providing that to whom, right? Like who is doing that work for which team members, and are they doing okay? Are they really tired? Emotional work can be particularly exhausting or energizing depending on your personality. But figure out who's doing the work. Somebody is doing that work. If you have a functioning culture, somebody in your firm is doing the work. It might not be your formal leadership team. It may be the admin assistant doing it for the lawyer. It might be the law clerk doing it for the managing partner, right? It could be any configuration of people, but somebody is doing that work if your organization is working well. And if you can figure out who's doing that work, who's kind of working in support of who at the firm, you can start to systematize it. I love systemization, right? Policies are good, mentoring programs are great, but you need a plan, right? You need to understand what you're trying to achieve. You should look at who's good at this stuff and who's not, because not everybody is great at this. Some people should be doing other things, and that is okay. But you need to have that balance in your team so that some people are doing that emotional work, building the culture, maintaining the culture, leading the culture. And as I said, it has to be at all levels, right? This is not something that, leaders can't just kind of parrot values and even if you're walking the walk, that's only half of the battle. You really do need to get this kind of culture building effort spread throughout the organization. And if you can do that, then it's easy, right? It just kind of replicates itself and it'll correct itself. It'll all kind of flow nicely.
Judah, I want to mention some of another finding in that TELA survey that I mentioned earlier. That survey found 3 critical components to creating a virtual office culture that I want to share with the listeners. So the first component that the respondent indicated was to have more virtual workshops and continue learning opportunities. I think a lot of people, including many of us, felt that we did not learn anything new since working remotely, and I think that's the case for maybe staff member. We have CLEs and stuff to attend, so they want more training courses, regular feedback, and professional development seminars that I think firms have forgotten to provide to their staff because we are all working remotely. So that was really high on their list. Another one was, I think, we're all doing this, but weekly staff meetings and one-on-ones with their manager. And this shouldn't be done just because it's form, but they want to use that time to learn about how they can help, what they want managers to ask them, how can I help you, share updates about the organizations, and that transparency that we are all talking about. So that was really high in their list. And also schedule flexibility as well. They feel just being able to be flexible with their schedule, and for manager and leadership to be responsive to that flexibility is very important. So those are the 3 things that they found to be very helpful in creating that environment that they feel will make them happy. So I think we could take a little bit from this and bring it back to our workplace and see what we can do in terms of helping create that culture.
That makes a lot of sense. And, at the end of the day here, Kirsty's right. Culture is everywhere. Values are everywhere. These are things that it doesn't take long to reflect on. And as lawyers, as professionals, we have certain common collected values around the administration of justice, around access to justice, around client service, around being a professional. And so there's a lot here that is already baked in. And it's just, how do you make that work for your specific group? And in terms of mentoring, just wanted to conclude on this piece. Not everyone needs to mentor. Not everyone needs to be a mentee. And if that's not something that is in your strength or something that you can do, there are other programs available. And so LawPRO has actually just put together a list of the Ontario-based mentoring programs. And so if you want to give back beyond your firm or you want support beyond your firm, there are all sorts of ways of doing this. And you can look and slice and dice to different programs based on skills or based on community. So check out the chart that's now in the chat function. For those on the replay, just go to Practice Pro and type in mentor, and the first hit will be this new chart. But that leaves us with a few minutes, and we're going to go fast and furious around it because really we've been focusing on people. But we've got 4 people here who all love process. And I think the reason we all love process and tech is because it frees up people to do better work faster and reduces anxiety, because people have systems in place to be able to do something without fretting about the how. You can focus on the what. You can focus more on that higher level work for your client instead of how do we start. And so Karen, let's start with you, because this is your yeah, that's your jam. Yeah, let's go.
We spend a lot of time in our business helping law firms create processes that are more effective and more efficient. And when your workplace is in flux, whether you're going to stay hybrid or go back to the office, everything is changing, but you want to make sure that your processes are in place and are as effective as possible, because that kind of process, having a system, a way of doing things, is going to give people structure and enable them, as you just alluded to have that creative energy go into something else. You have processes in your firm. I can guarantee you, even if they're not written down, you have them. But what you need to do at this point, especially now, I think as we're coming into summer, it's a good time because sometimes it's a bit slow for people in the office. So it's a chance for you to capture a lot of those processes that you know are happening, but are stuck inside people's heads. When you have a process that's stuck inside your head, you can't empower anyone else to do it. Nobody can do it for you if you're sick, if you're in court, if you're on vacation in the summer. Just think of how hard it is to get yourself organized to go away on vacation. It's maybe we've all forgotten what that feels like, but we're going to get back into it. Because you're trying to remember all the things that you need to do. But if you have a process in place, then you're not going to waste any of your mental energy on trying to remember what it is that you have to do. You can't delegate anything unless you have a process in place. And your process doesn't have to be complicated. It can be a really simple matter of we have a 5-step approach that we teach people, which is just start by tracking what you do. Pick one thing that you have to do regularly in your firm. And maybe it's got something to do with intake, whatever it is, just pick one thing. And the next time you have to do it, track exactly how you do it. Just write it down. You don't have to have fancy software. You don't have to have an app for it. You can just grab a Google Doc or open a Word document or whatever, and just write down exactly what you do. And as you're writing it down for each step that you go through, and do it while you're doing the process yourself so that you don't miss things. Record what you're using. Is there a piece of software that you're using? Is there a template that you're using? Is there an email that you send all the time? Record all of that information. So it's track, record. And then the next time you have to do the process, you're going to test it yourself just by following your list to see whether you can actually follow your process. Then you're definitely going to have to tweak it. If you've got somebody else in your office, like I always run a lot, well, not all, but a lot of the time I run processes past my business partner because he and I think very, very differently. And if he can follow my process, then I know that the rest of our team will be able to follow the process. So test it on yourself or someone else in your office, then tweak it, because you're definitely going to have to tweak it. You'll have missed something, and then teach it to others. And when you teach it to others, you have to give them the authority. This is part of giving people structure, but also giving them meaning. You have to let the people that you're delegating your work to, your processes to, you have to let them take ownership, tweak it themselves, own that, teach it to others. So your whole idea here is really to capture what it is that you do, in a system that makes it transferable to others, that saves time and energy for you and you in the firm, and then also gives you a foundation that you can start improving on. Because if you've just got a process in your head, it's just going to live in your head. It's very difficult to improve. Once it's written down step by step and you can capture it, you can look at it, people can go back, people can test it, you can then start improving it. And that's the next whole phase of how to move into this new normal, is to take those processes, the way you're looking at them, the way you're doing them now, capture them, and then think about improving them. You have to think about, how you can eliminate the friction, and what process you choose to work on should be something you do regularly, but it also should be something where every time you do it, you think, oh, that just takes longer than I think it should take me, or that's just more complicated than it needs to be. It just seems harder than it should be. Grab that process, and the next time you do it, write down every single step and find a place to share those. So we know firms that have, they keep all their processes, they call them their standard operating procedures, and they keep them all in SharePoint, or they keep them all in a wiki, in Teams, or they keep them all in a set of shared Google Docs, wherever. You just have to make sure that you're regularly capturing them, you're testing them and tweaking them, and that you're sharing them somewhere where people can find them. You must do it's right now, because people are really starting to think about the new normal. It's a fabulous opportunity to do that. And like I said earlier, to capture what's been working now and bring the working stuff with you into the future.
The other piece it does, Karen, I love this, because these processes, it's not top down. You have processes. You don't have to dictate them. You don't have to, say thou shalt. It's really starting with where you're at. Yep. And that's really important for preparing for whatever's next, because things are going to change. If you're currently all remote or hybrid, but not by design, once you know where you want to go next, you're going to need to change all of your processes. But yep, in order to change, you need to know where you're coming from so that things don't get missed. And we've seen things get missed at LAWPRO. This was this COVID thing that hit us. Obviously, there were going to be process errors along the way. We saw checks go missing because clerks didn't know where they went. We saw, somebody have to self-isolate coming into contact with somebody who tested positive. Part of the file is in the office, part of the file is on their computer. How do you manage to get the file done in a timely manner with all of the documents? These are pain points that people face right now. But as we move to where we want to go next, we're assuming that we are going to come into a next normal that's by design. Yep. And so if it's going to be by design, then it starts with asking us what are we doing right now and what's working from that? And where do we want to go next? And if we're going to go to hybrid, or we're going to go to some other model that's not our current model, we need to be able to see what in our script right now is going to need to change. So Kirsty, you've already gone through a few of these changes. Maybe we can ask you to jump into.
No, I mean, Karen's process is the process, right? That's what you do to do this stuff. The challenges, I think, are getting buy-in from people who are not process nerds. That is very difficult. And I think Karen is exactly right. The way you get buy-in is by showing people you make their life better, right? So start with something that's painful or irritating. Listen to people when they complain about a piece of their work and fix it for them. And if you can show them that this kind of initiative can make their life better, they will become your champions who are now telling other people, hey, tell this group of people or tell this consultant how your life sucks, and they will make it better for you, right? They will make your job more interesting. They will free up your time so you can do the stuff that your brain is needed for, right? I think, Karen, when you were talking, all I could think about was my kids in virtual school, and my daughter is trying to learn geometry. And she's got this ridiculous Google slide, and she spent half of the time doing the lesson inputting text boxes so she could write the answer in the text box. And that's really ridiculous and not adding value, not teaching her anything about geometry, not letting her use her brain. And the practice of law can be much like that, right? We can develop these processes over time that just become archaic and complicated, and
they become they're your normal, and you don't know there's another way to do them until somebody says, hey, that's wasteful. There's another way. Let's look at what's broken about that. You don't have to cut the roast in half every time. Your oven's not the same size as grandma's oven. There's all these things. You're absolutely right.
And you save so much time, which is money and productivity and engagement, right? You have great people working for you who have so much capacity, so much talent. And they can bring those talents to bear on issues that are worthy of their time and worthy of what they bring to the table. And you can really grind people down, I think, by taking great people with great ideas and making them run through really stupid processes that are just not effective. So it feels like a massive investment of time. I know this. I have done this at our firm, right? I come from a world, Judah knows, where we do this stuff all the time. We do it for fun with post-it notes in boardrooms, and we think it's great. When I came to private practice, that was not necessarily, people were not necessarily as enthusiastic as they have been in other rooms I've been in. But again, if you show the value of it and you make people's lives better, you show them stuff can be done in a simpler, more effective way, then they become champions for it. Like, you know, only the converted can be champions.
And what we tend to find, and I don't know if you find the same thing, but what we find is when we're facilitating a group and we are actually getting their ideas for how to make it better, often they've never been asked. They're frustrated. They're working in it. They've created workarounds for some broken process, because we're good at creating workarounds as humans, right? That's what we do. So they've created some series of workarounds. No one's ever asked them how they can make it better. So when we do a process mapping exercise, or we look at improving a process, we say, well, what are you doing now? And how would you do it if you could do it differently in a blue sky world? How would you do it differently? And when the ideas are coming from the people who are stuck grinding away in that process, it's their idea. The change is their change, and that change comes from the ground up. All you have to do as a leader is support them, give them the tools. They will come up with the process improvements for you, and it's their idea. They own it, and they're much more likely to buy into it.
I want to contribute by saying that I think it really helps to have like a third party involved, especially when you're talking about buy-in. And I work with a lot of firms where like there's resistance, but when you have a third party involved to show them, as you two mentioned, like show them how things could be done differently, or show them like what they didn't know, that really helps with you know, getting them used to like a new process. And I think, you know, based on, I think having the right tool is very important too. Like there are so many tools out there, and I think when they use the wrong tool, it really discourage them to further, you know, implement a new process or automate a process. So I think they do need to take the time to vet the tool and to test the tool, like whatever technology that they want to use before jumping on that, because the wrong technology tool will turn a firm off on any processes if they have a bad experience. So, but I think like someone like Karen coming in to show them that really helps, as opposed to the firm sort of like trying to struggle with this on their own.
So we could spend like days talking about process and how you can reimagine your firm. And unfortunately, we're running out of time. There have been a few questions about, you know, the tech and which pieces you pick. And what we're trying to focus on here is really, yes, there are great tools, but you will know best what will serve you best. You will know your systems best. You will know your client base best. It's going to be you. There's actually a lot of creativity that can go into how you want to innovate based on what are the tasks, as Karen put, that you have right now. And so we're not going to have time to get into all of the steps that are necessary or all of the ways that you could slice or dice for your practice. What we have instead are resources. So if you go to the program resources for today, you're going to see lots of articles. Karen's got a wonderful article. For those who got the materials early, we're emailing it separately, but you can also re-download the entire package from practicepro.ca. We have lists of types of legal tech products that might assist, but we also have deep dive articles that I've authored around some of the things that you can think about for innovation mindset, which isn't just about tech, but how you can bring your team in, and lots of tips there. I think I've got 20 tips there to help you on the innovation journey for what your processes will look like and what your next normal launch will look like. And so unfortunately, we're running a little low on time. So I'm going to thank our speakers now and thank you all for coming today. And just a few reminders before we conclude. First is that this program is eligible both for 1.5 hours of professionalism credit for the Law Society CPD requirements. It's also eligible for LawPro's risk management credit, which you can claim at lawpro.ca. The program itself is going to be available shortly on practicepro.ca's CPD webpage. So if there are parts you want to revisit, you'll be able to as well. when the replay is ready, we're going to send out a post via avoidaclaim.com, which is our blog. And so if you want to be in the know, you can subscribe there for updates. Toronto Lawyers Association is also going to let people know about when things are available. So thank you to our speakers again for sharing your time. Hong, Karen, Kirsty, thank you. Toronto Lawyers Association is actually going to be making a donation to Lawyers Feed the Hungry today on behalf of you. So thank you again. At the Toronto Lawyers Association, Joan, Deirdre, Sandra, Stephanie, Darnell, the entire team, we thank you as always for the amazing support and for hosting these events. Thank you to Ontario's law associations who promoted this event. Over at LawPro, there's a whole team behind these events that help make them happen. For today in particular, Sean Urquhart did a lot of heavy lifting, but thank you for all of the LawPro colleagues who assisted on this event. So now it's up to you thank you for attending, and you can help us get to our next level. You're going to be receiving an email from Toronto Lawyers Association with the program evaluation. And so please complete it. It helps both TLA and LawPro develop timely, helpful programming, practical programming for you. If you have other direct comments you'd like to share or just want to reach out, I can always be reached at practicepro@lawpro.ca. So that concludes our program for today. I want to thank you all for joining us. Please be safe. Check out the resources when you have time. And till we speak again, thanks again for joining.